You just learned a ton about angles as far as complementary, supplementary, adjacent, vertical, how they all relate, how we can find these missing angles. So we're going to take that one step further and look at some angle equations. So we're going to start off simple and then we'll add on to it. So when we look at this, just to remind you, complementary angles are the pairs of angles that have the sum of 90 degrees. That means they add up to 90 degrees to create that right angle. They don't necessarily have to be adjacent to each other, meaning next to, but a lot of times they are. So in this case, now you usually can do these in your head, but we are going to build on to these to get more complicated. But we know that these two angles are going to have to add up to 90 degrees because they create that right angle. So if I was going to write and solve an equation for that, oops, one moment. If I was going to write and solve an equation for that, we know that if you take x and you add the 22 to it, right, you're adding these two together, we know they're going to equal 90 degrees, okay, because they're creating that right angle. So now that that's our equation, I know this has been a long time since we looked at equations, but remember, you have to do the same thing to each side and you're undoing whatever's happening to the variable, right? So when we solve equations, we're always trying to get the variable by itself. So in order to get x by itself in this case, we're going to have to undo our 22 here, meaning we're going to have to subtract it from both sides. And this is really what you were doing anyways. You just were kind of skipping the equation part, but we're going to start incorporating that. So that leaves us with just x on this side. And when you subtract that 90 minus 22, we end up with 68. And we're going to add that degree sign in it when we do our examples like this. And so that's what we get. Okay, not a lot different than what you've done before. Let's try one more. So this one is about supplementary angles. Remember, those add up to 180 degrees. Again, they do not have to be adjacent necessarily, but we're focusing on this part right here of writing and solving an equation, okay? And so when we look at these, they're going to create that supplementary angle of 180 degrees. So we know if we take 67 and y together, they will create that 180. So we're going to add those together and write our equation. Okay, and so we want to get the variable by itself. That's always our goal when we are solving an equation. And so right now it's being added by 67, so we need to subtract it in this case. And if we do it to one side, we have to do it to the other. And so I end up with y equals. Now if you have to do a little work off to the side, you're more than welcome to. Like on this one, we're going to have to borrow. Okay, if you can do that in your head, that's perfectly fine. But we end up with, oops, I'm sorry, one moment. I made a little mistake there. Okay, and we end up with the 113, sorry about that. Okay, 113 degrees. My degree symbol got a little big there. Okay, so that would be our answer for this one. All right, that you might be like, Miss Lynch, we already know this. Okay, let's get just a little harder. So now this time, it's not just focusing on the angle. Again, when we're solving for the variable, it's telling us just what x would be. It's not saying what the whole angle would be, okay? So we want to write and solve an equation to find the value of the variable, okay? So this answer is not going to be what our entire angle is going to be, okay? We want to figure out what the variable is, and then we'll substitute that in to figure out how much the actual angle part is, okay? But we know that because of this right here, this is going to be 90 degrees. And I know that if I put these two together, it's going to equal that, okay? And so I want to set up my equation as 22 plus x plus 7 equals 90. Okay, so then I need to get that variable by itself. Well, if you would like to, you could combine a few things here. Okay, so you could put 22 and 7 together to get 29 plus x, right? Because we're just adding it all together. Just don't forget to bring that equals 90 with you. And so then we need to get the variable by itself. So we're going to subtract 29 from both sides. And so x ends up being, if you got to borrow on this one, again, you can do it in your head or off to the side, your choice. But we end up with 61. Now, it's not 61 degrees, okay? That's 61 for x, all right? So if you wanted to, real quick, you could substitute 61 in for that and do x plus 6. Oops, I'm sorry, not x. We would do 61 plus 7 to get 68. And we know that 68 plus 22 would get us to that 90. And so that means that that is correct. Okay, so we're using those skills of what we know about angles and our equation knowledge to find those missing pieces. Let's look at another. Okay. All right, so this one, we have 3y plus that 54 is going to get us to that 180, okay, because these are supplementary angles. So to write that equation, we have 3y plus 54 equals 180. Okay, so now this is something we didn't totally talk about, but I'm going to give you a quick intro into. So this is a two-step equation. The last one was a two-step equation as well. It was just easier because we could add the 22 and 7 together first. So it kind of ended up being a one-step equation. But for this one, whenever you have a two-step equation, you always want to deal with the addition or subtraction first, because if you deal with the multiplication and division, you're going to have to apply that to both numbers and it's going to get real complicated. So we just want to focus on the addition or subtraction first. So because we are adding 54 to the 3y right now, we have to undo that. So we're going to subtract 54. Now we are taking it away from 3y, but all it really does is just kind of get rid of it there. Okay, now you don't have to scribble it out, I'm just showing you. So we still have 3y on this side, and it's going to equal our, again, got to borrow, lots of borrowing in this one. Okay, we end up with 126. So the last thing we have to do is undo this y, or I'm sorry, this 3. The 3 is being multiplied to the y, so we have to divide both sides by 3. Now, if you need to set that up off to the side, you are more than welcome to. Okay, but I know I can kind of do that in my head because I know that 3 fits into 12 4 times. I'm just going to set my y equals. And 3 fits into 6 2 times. There were no leftovers, so I know it ends up with 42. Now, just a quick reminder, 42 is not our answer because obviously 42, or I should say is not our angle measurement, because this is obviously an obtuse angle. And so 42 is not going to be obtuse, but if we substitute in and do 42 times 3, oops, I'm sorry, it gets a little sloppy here. Okay, which is what we end up getting to with that 126. And that makes much more sense, right? That looks like, okay, it's a little bit bigger than 90, but not too much. So it's kind of around that 126. That makes sense. And again, if I add that to 54 to double check my work, it should add up. Oops, I'm sorry. It should add up to that 180, which it does. So you can always check your work like that. Last one, I know this has been a little bit of a lengthy video, but I want to make sure you have all the information you need. So when we look at this one, this is going to be our last one. Again, we're writing and solving an equation. And so we're not actually using complementary or supplementary on this one. We are using vertical angles. Remember, when they're straight across from each other like that, they're vertical angles. And vertical angles always have the same measurement. So it means that ultimately this altogether will get us to 55. Okay, to equal that 55. So we are just going to set that up as 5x plus 12. We know that's supposed to end up being 55 because since they're vertical angles, it's going to be the same as the one across from it, which is 55. So this is going to equal 55. Okay, so again, two-step equation. We always deal with the addition or subtraction first. So we're going to subtract 12. Because that's what we need to do to undo that. It keeps 5x still, but now we end up with 43. And we need to divide on this one. It's not going to work out perfectly, but we can make it work. So we're going to divide by 5 on both sides. And again, if you need to do a little work off to the side, you're more than welcome to. But I'm sure you can figure out that 5 times 8 gives you 40. And remember, when we end up with leftovers like that, we just add a decimal and a 0 and bring it down. And thankfully, 5 fits into 30 just right. And I popped up my decimal because 5 times 6 is 30. So we end up with x equals 8.6. Okay, and sorry, my writing's getting a little sloppy here. So if you were to substitute that in for x and solve, you would do 5 times 8.6 and then add 12 to it, and you should end up with 55. You can always double check your work like that. Okay, Now, if you need to pause or rewind or go back and take a look at something, feel free, or you can ask me a question with email or something like that. But otherwise, I just have 2 problems I want you to try, okay? And these are on your notes or on the document I shared with you. I want you to answer these 2 problems down here, okay? So solve for x. You're going to write and solve an equation to find the value of the variable to help you find that missing angle. And I want you to, after you've done it, post your work and answers on Seesaw any way you'd like. You have to show your work too. Whether you want to type it, whether you want to take a picture and show me what you did, that's fine. Just make sure I can see that you did work, and then make sure your answers are clear, okay? Good luck. Again, I know this was a long video, but it had all the information you needed in it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, good luck, and I look forward to seeing your Seesaw post.